Erev Shabbat Shalom Rabotai. We're continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Peah. We're up to Perek Zayin Mishnah Bet. As an introduction to the Mishnah, let me explain the diagram that we will be working with. You have 3 rows of olive trees that are separated by 2 patches of other produce. Meaning, let us explain. You have 1 olive tree, 1 olive tree, 1 olive tree. Then you have a patch of grain. Again, you have 1 olive tree, 1 olive tree, 1 olive tree, a patch of grain, and then again, 1 olive tree, 1 olive tree, and 1 olive tree. So you have 3 olive trees that are separated by 2 patches of grain. Now the Mishnah says, Zayit shenimtza omed ben shalosh shurot shel shnei malbenim. You have an olive tree that is standing in the middle of 3 rows of trees. So it's in the middle, it's the middle tree in the middle row that is separated from each other by 2 strips of land. Ushchacho, and you forgot that tree, and no shicha, it is not considered shicha, because again, shicha only applies when you forgot it because of forgetfulness, not because of an outside factor. Here you forgot it because of an outside factor. It was hidden by the 2 trees that are beside it. So again, you have an olive tree, an olive tree, an olive tree, all next to each other. You have a patch of grain separating. You have an olive tree, an olive tree, an olive tree, patch of grain separating, an olive tree, an olive tree, an olive tree. The case is the second olive tree of the middle row. The middle olive tree of the second row, which is the middle row, you forgot that, and shicha is not considered shicha because the reason you forgot it is not because of your forgetfulness, but because it's being hidden by the trees on its opposite sides. Again, Rabotai, if an olive tree contains 2 se'ah worth of fruit in volume, and you forgot to harvest those olives, and no shicha is not considered shicha, because again, we learned, just like when you have 2 se'ah of grain, that you forgot either the bundle or to harvest, it's not considered shicha because it's a lot of quantity, you're going to remember it. Same thing by the olives, if it's 2 se'ah or more, it's not considered shicha because it's a lot of quantity, you're going to come back and get it. Now, the previous Mishnah, the Alayev explains that we learned if an olive tree has a distinct name or distinct productivity or distinct location, for example, by the name, it drips so much oil even without squeezing it, it's called shavchoni. So the Rab says, and we learned previously in the Mishnah, if you have an olive that it drips oil before you even squeeze it and you forgot it, it's not considered shicha. So the Mishnah comments now, when did we say that olive will not become shicha? That's only if the person who's harvesting the surrounding trees did not begin to harvest this tree with the reputation. If you began to harvest that tree with the reputation, it drips oil before you even squeeze it, even such a tree that drips oil before you even squeeze it because it's so fruitful, and you forgot to harvest it, it is considered shicha, because the whole logic that it wasn't considered shicha is because since it's so unique, the farmer will not skip it completely. He'll remember about it. However, once he starts to harvest it, he might actually think that he finished it. Therefore, he's going to forget to come back. Therefore, once he started harvesting it, it's not considered shicha. Once he starts harvesting it, it is considered shicha. If he forgets, he cannot come back. It's only not considered shicha if he didn't harvest it at all. We say that he didn't forget about it, he's going to come back. But if he started to harvest it and he forgot, we say that he forgot, he thought he finished it, therefore it has the law of shicha. Until it has 2 se'ah. Once it has 2 se'ah of fruit, then it falls back on the basic halakha that once it has 2 se'ah, he never forgets about it. Now, if a person forgot some fruit on the tree, before we spoke about in the previous Mishnah, you forgot a whole tree. How about if you forgot some olives on a tree? It does not become shicha until you finish harvesting that tree and the leaves. And the Mishnah explains, Kol zman sheyesh lo tachtav, yesh lo berusho. Which the Rav explains, if the farmer remembers the olives on the top of the tree while the olives beneath the tree still need to be gathered, yesh lo berosho, he has the right to go back and collect the olives on the top of the tree. Meaning, until the farmer collects all the olives from under the tree, it's not called finishing harvesting. And therefore, whatever's still on top of the tree is not called forgotten. Once the farmer removes all the olives from the ground and finishes with the tree, any olives forgotten on the tree are shicha, and he may not go back to collect them. And we learned, Rabotai, even though the olives fell, you're allowed to collect them because there's no such mitzvah by tree. There's leket by stalks that fell, or by peret, that the grapes that fell from the cluster, but there's no such mitzvah by the tree. Therefore, when the olives fall down from the tree, you're allowed to collect it. So as long as he still didn't finish collecting from the bottom of the tree, he's able to collect whatever's still hanging. Once he finished collecting from the bottom, he can no longer take what's hanging on the tree. It's considered shicha. Rabbi Meir says, even after the fruit is cleared from the ground, the fruits that are on top of the tree can still be collected. It's not considered shicha. Mishetelecha machbeh. Until the worker who searches for the hidden fruit has left. Because they explain, the Teferet Yisrael explains, after the harvester finished picking the fruit, a worker would bang on the tree with the stick to loosen any olives that were hidden among the branches. So until the worker who searches for this hidden fruit that might be hiding left, the farmer has the right to collect the top of the tree. Once he left, then the farmer cannot take any more. Anything that's forgotten is considered shicha. That is the end of Rabotai Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel now discusses a person who's harvesting his vineyard. And some of the grapes fell from the cluster. He has to leave it. It's known as the mitzvah of peret. Just like you have leket when you harvest your grain and you cut with the sickle the fistful of grain that you're holding, and some of the grain falls, it's considered leket. So too grapes that fall from the cluster are considered peret, that you have to leave for the poor. The Mishnah explains, Ezeu peret, what's considered peret? Hanosher bishat bitzira, grapes that fall during the harvest, meaning the individual grapes that fall from the cluster while it is being picked, those you have to leave for the poor. Haya botzer, someone was harvesting grapes. Akatzet ha'eshkol, cut a cluster. Husbach be'anim nafal me'adol haaretz. It got tangled in the leaves of the vine and it fell from his hand to the ground. V'nifrat, and now some grapes became separated from the cluster. Hareu shel ba'al habayit. These separated grapes belong to the owner. They're not considered peret because, again, just like by leket, by the grain that falls, it has to be that it fell not because of an outside factor. Like we said, a case where you got cut by a thorn and you dropped some of the grain, you get to keep that because it's an outside factor. Same thing by peret. Since in this case it did not fall because of the harvest, it fell because it got tangled in the ordinary process when you were picking the cluster from the vine, it got tangled in the leaves and then it fell. That is considered the owner's. It's not peret because it didn't fall in the ordinary way by way of harvest. It fell because it got tangled in the leaves. If someone places a basket beneath the grapevine when he's harvesting the grapes, he wants to catch any grapes that fall and keep it to himself. He's trying to circumvent the Torah. The Torah says if it falls to the ground, you have to leave it for the poor. Here he wants to put a basket so nothing considers falling. He is robbing the poor. Again, like we said earlier, the pasuk says upon this, Al taseg givul olim. Do not violate the boundary of the poor, which means do not withhold from the poor what is rightfully theirs. And the Rav explains, the peret benishirato zachu bo anim kodem shegiu laaretz. Why? Because he says the person had a misunderstanding. He assumed that the grapes do not become peret. Why is it called stealing? Maybe I did the right thing. I saved myself. So the Mefarshim explained the owner had a mistaken thought. He thought that the grapes only become the poor people's once it hits the ground. Then it's called peret. If it didn't hit the ground, I could save it by putting a basket. This is the mistake that he had. Because the halacha is, the Rab explains, that grapes become peret and the property of the poor as soon as they separate from the cluster, even if it's in midair. By the time it lands in the basket on the ground, it already belongs to the poor. So whatever you're taking in that basket, you're gozel anim, you're stealing from the poor. Because you thought that only when it touches the ground it's the poor. So if I put a basket, it never touches the ground, it's mine. But the Mishnah is teaching you, no, once it falls off the cluster, even in midair, The poor people, zoche, they have the right to collect it. So when it falls in your basket, it already belongs to the poor guy. Therefore, you're stealing from the poor. What the pasuk says, al tesig gevul olim. Do not violate the boundary of the poor. Do not steal what is rightfully theirs. That is the end of today's Mishnah Yomi, Rabotai. Everyone should have a erev Shabbat Shalom. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.